its highest level since April. All right, we're going to focus on that jobs number and get more insight on that 6.2% unemployment rate. And joining us, John Herrmann, Director of U.S. Rate Strategies, Mitsubishi UFJ Securities. John, always good to have you back on the show.
Michelle, it's great to be with you.
Always good to have you back. Now, what is good or not so good? 200,000 jobs as opposed to the expectation of 230,000?
Okay, so, as you were mentioning, so we had about 210,000. There was 15,000 previous month revisions. So that's about 225. The other thing, there was a couple of little subtle statistical quirks. It was an early reference week, an early reference survey, and sometimes companies don't have enough time to get the information submitted.
So they could be revised upwards?
They could be revised upwards in the next month or two. So I think that's a fair point. So overall, even with the back month revisions, you may see something in total, 230, 235, 240 in coming months as we get all the final data.
Now let's talk about the 6.2% from 6.1 unemployment rate.
Okay.
How should we interpret that?
I think your read was the correct read, which is that the economy is strengthening, the labor markets are improving, and we're beginning to see people return to the labor market in search of work. And where we saw it most specifically, the biggest rise was in the younger people, aged 20 to 24, and then also from 24 to 34. So these are people who just finished up their college educations or maybe their graduate school studies and are now re-entering the labor market because they cannot sit down indefinitely.
But yet the labor participation rate remains at its lowest since 1978.
Yeah, a tiny uptick, 1/10 uptick, which explained the unemployment rate moving up, but in general, very, very low since, as you're saying, since the end of the 70s. I think what we should really look at it as there will be a tussle in this debate. Janet Yellen, Chairwoman Yellen, for the last 5 years has said, when the job market gets stronger, these people will start to re-enter in search for work and in search of employment. That's what will happen. And for the last 5 years, it looked like the wrong interpretation because you said the labor force position kept declining. But now what we're seeing is maybe we are entering a little choppy period where you're starting to see some of that at work.
And that's why I want to talk about the U6. Because does that 6.2% really give us an accurate picture? Firstly, explain what the U6 is.
The U6, you have the U3 is really what we would call short-term cyclical unemployment. And for those workers who have very strong skills and very good worker attachment to the labor force, have connections with other companies and so on, they're finding it, when they get disrupted, they're finding it much easier to get disrupted, move out of work, and then re-enter and get back and get re-employed.
But we've got
they're finding it much easier. So the U3 is definitely telling us that. It's very clear. Then we have the more structural type unemployment, which is captured in the U6, which is people who are working part-time, who would like to work full-time, people who are a little bit discouraged, people who are maybe, have had a difficult, maybe they're, I hate to use the word burned out, but maybe they're, a little bit, down on their luck and are just hesitant to look for jobs.
So we've got the underemployed and we've got the part-time employee, which is at a high. And
it did not move up this month. It did not move up, fortunately.
But we're at 18.8%.
Yes, we're at very high. We're at a very high level overall.
Many are saying that this is exacerbated by some of the Obamacare policies, which require, if your company is above a certain number of full-time employees, you've got to give them those benefits. Do you think this is a real factor?
I think there may be a little bit of that at work, but I think in general what we have is when you look back with the GDP revisions you mentioned earlier, the GDP, they did bump up, the first 6 months of this year, but they really pulled down 2011 and 2012 growth. So it really makes sense that those years were so soft that people were sitting on the sidelines and very hesitant to enter. Now, as things get better, we may find them beginning to enter again. And I think that's what makes next year's call on the Fed a very interesting call.
Mentioning the Fed, how do you think the Fed is going to interpret this? They've been tapering the bond purchases. Will they have that rate hike that everybody's expecting in the first half of next year?
I think it's going to be a very close call. We're one of the people who a long time ago said the Fed would have enough improvement in the economy to hike in the first half of the year, most likely in the second quarter. But I have to tell you, I mean, even though it's been my baseline call for a couple of years now, I think it's a little bit suspect, because I think what Janet Yellen really wants to do is she really wants to grow this economy, get it as strong as possible, and really re-employ as many people as possible. When she talks under testimony, she mentions the fact that, you know, people, when they're out of work for long periods of time, their physical health gets affected. They mentioned that the children in those families, their physical health gets affected. So her motivation is so passionate on this that it's going to be a tough battle next year. So look for her to try to push this economy as hard and fast as she can. That's what I take away on it.
Okay. We'll see what next month's data reveals. All right. As always, a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
John Herrmann, Director of U.S. Strategies, Mitsubishi UFJ Securities. We're taking a quick break.